friend. Welcome to the Mamahood After Trauma podcast. I'm your host, Emily Cleghorn. This podcast is for mamas navigating childhood trauma while also walking through mamahood. Together, we will empower each other to connect with who we were created to be versus who we were told to be in our trauma. I'm so excited that you've decided to take some time out of your day to join me and tune in. I hope you find this podcast uplifting and empowering. Let's get to it. Hey, friends. Welcome to this episode of the Mamahood After Trauma podcast. I'm so thankful that you decided to join me. Today, I am so excited to welcome Dana to the show. Welcome, Dana.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem at all. I'm so excited for our conversation today. So let's get started by having you share a little bit of your story.
Absolutely. It's a long one that I have actually written out into 3 books. One of them has been published already, but I was born to a teenage mother who didn't want me. In fact, immediately after giving birth to me, the placenta, she had her tubes tied. She obviously didn't want children, and grandma and great grandma decided that they weren't going to have their only grand and great grandchild raised by other people. So I was not given up for adoption. I was kept, which turned out unfortunate for me. My mother married an abusive narcissist. So I went through the whole gamut of physical abuse, verbal, emotional, the whole thing. I thank God every day I was never, ever, ever sexually abused. But my goodness, words are enough. I would take the words over the physical abuse any day. And I don't mean any disrespect to anybody else that has been physically abused, because that was awful too. And, you learn, I had to learn very, very young. Um, I had a friend that said, the narcissists and abusers in general, they wear this mask, they put on this facade out in public, but we as victims also wear a mask. So I had to learn at a very young age to, oh, that bruise on my forehead, I ran into a door, I fell. The hand marks around my neck, I don't know, I must have accidentally grabbed my, you make excuses because you're afraid. You are terrified to expose what's happening behind closed doors. But to go through that as a little girl, and on top of that have the um, added verbal abuse, which is psychological, emotional, and every which way, of every day being told nobody wanted you, you're a burden, your mother doesn't even love you, nobody's ever going to love you, I shouldn't have to pay for another man's child, all these things. I was a little girl. And I always tell people, like, it sounds awful, but literally think of a 4, 5, 6 year old child that picture them and picture saying that to them every single day, and every day as long as they live under your roof. That's disgusting. But unfortunately, when you're a child, when you're older, people say, oh, just leave the relationship, walk away, why do you stay? You don't have a choice when you're a kid.
You don't have that power.
No,
you don't have that power.
You don't. And it's unfortunate. I mean, my experience is mostly with narcissists, so I am speaking from that end. But I feel like a lot of abusers also discredit their victims, whether they are children, as was my case, or whether they are grown. That they kind of set a rhetoric and a narrative among family and among people that, oh, she's difficult, or, oh, we think she has mental problems because she's accusing us of this and that, like they kind of set the stage so that if you have enough, if you're brave enough to say something, people don't believe you anyway. And then you're that much more discouraged to open your mouth again. So it took until I was 16 years old for something really awful to happen in the house. For me to just, I mean, I was strangled, thrown down a half a flight of stairs. I actually thought I was going to die that night if I hadn't and it was actually my mother this time, which was sad. She was participating in this instead of just gaslighting me, trying to force me to submit to him. She actually put her hands around my neck this particular night. And I kicked her because when I got to the point where I was blacking out and could not breathe and thought I was going to die, I thought I can't get her hands off my neck, but I can kick her. And I kicked her in the stomach. And, to this day, I have to hear about how she had just had, I don't even know, honestly, I don't remember, but she had had some kind of surgery on her stomach or some gynecological, procedure done. So of course she let go of me and I was able to escape the house. But, the next day at school, here I should back up that night. Um, as I was running through the streets crying at night, randomly with not even knowing where to go or what to do. Um, a classmate of mine that I knew was driving by and saw me and ended up taking me to a friend's house where I spent the night. And I was thankful no questions were asked. It was late. I was obviously distraught. They took me in. I'd known this family since, very early childhood. So, they took me in, but the next day at school, here I was, with hand marks on my neck and scratches and bruises all over my body and, you know, wearing the same clothes I'd worn the day before and everything. Obviously, it alerted
Mm.
people who were concerned in the school, staff members, teachers, counselors. Um, Police were called, child services was called. Um, and it ended up not doing any good. Um, I thought it was ironic that, you know, child services and the police had to contact my parents as opposed to my parents having called me in as a runaway, or they never called around asking where I was the night before. They didn't care. And I thought that that spoke for itself. But unfortunately, child services and the police, after questioning me, and I told them the truth of what had happened, they said, well, unfortunately, we've interviewed neighbors, we've interviewed the people who work for your parents, we've interviewed all these people, and they all just think your parents are these wonderful people. They're, you know, charitable and they're generous and they're upstanding members of society. And, it was it was really frustrating, and again,
Mhm.
I get taken to the police station and there's my mother and stepfather sitting there looking sorrowful, like they, putting on the show. And I
Mhm.
knew it was baloney, but everybody was eating it up that they just didn't know what to do with me. And, they were so sad and I just shut down. There was nothing to
Mhm.
say. I didn't say a word. What else am I gonna say? So I was given 2 options: to go back home with them, which there was no way in heck I was gonna do, or I had to do what they wanted me to do, which my mother and stepfather decided I needed help. So I needed to go to a mental facility for children, for juveniles. And so I said, well, then I guess that's where I'm going. And and that's what happened. And it was strange being there because for many reasons, because I didn't belong there, because nobody would. I felt like people there were listening to me, but at the same time, I felt like it was a relief for them to have me there because they were dealing with, it's just like you see in the movies where there's just a big open room that you eat in that room, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you socialize in that room. Everything is just like you're sitting in this big room with nothing and nobody. It's enough to make you go crazy though when, the one gal's over there banging a chair against, the unbreakable windows repeatedly, and somebody's over in that corner, rocking and trying to soothe themselves, and all these things that are going on. And you're like, I don't belong here. Like, I'm going to go nuts if I stay here. But the staff was really good to me because they could talk to me and I could talk to them, and they were so gracious. But the irony of it all was they had the psychiatrists come in. I was talked to by therapists. Nobody gave me any medication. I was not diagnosed with any mental health conditions. I was sad and upset and frustrated and all these things, and certainly I had triggers. It's hard not to when you grow up in a home like that, and I learned how to walk on eggshells, and I knew what would make them upset or not make them upset, and learned how to people please and don't do this and all the rules, to keep whatever peace I could. But I still had triggers, like the sound of
Mhm.
footsteps, especially, you know, there was a certain intonation of footstep that I knew was male, and it was my stepfather coming for me, so to speak. And just certain things would just make me like a cat, like all my hair would stand up and I would brace myself. But
Mhm.
aside from that, I was in this place that I didn't need to be. But because I had been signed into there by my mother and stepfather, the only way out was them to sign me out. And I'm fortunate if this is a good thing that my stepfather's a narcissist, and narcissists don't like to spend money on anybody but themselves. And he certainly did not approve of doctor's visits or anything for my mother or I. Um, so he certainly wasn't going to pay for me to be there. So as soon as the insurance ran out a month later, I was released. But it was a terrifying experience to think that they could not only abuse me and get away with it, but put me in a situation like that where I was sharing a room for a month with a girl who had stabbed her friend to death. And where, I mean, it's like the terror, like, didn't I wasn't being helped there. It was just adding to it, and it was really frustrating. But as it turned out, I had to go back home. There was no other way out because nobody would listen, nobody would believe me. Um, they had won, so to speak. So you'd think I would leave their house at 18 and go out into the world with a little more caution, which I thought I did, but then I ended up 19 years old in a very fast-paced and quick-moving relationship with this guy I met. um, Walked into my office one day and honestly thought he was an entitled jerk. He actually reminded me very much of my stepfather. So I was like, oh, screw him. I'm not going anywhere near him. I want nothing to do with this man. Yeah, well, 25 years later, um, turns out he was a covert narcissist, and that's why I didn't see him coming. There were red flags right away, but he was also promising me everything. And coming out of the childhood home I came out of, I just wanted somebody to love me.
Mhm.
After being told I was unlovable and unworthy and insignificant and everything else, I just wanted somebody to love me.
Mhm.
Simple human necessity. I wanted that connection. I wanted a person. And even though everything in me, just the first few interactions, I didn't even like him, not in the least. But I thought maybe I'm being too judgmental. Maybe I'm not being open. Maybe I don't want to be one of those people who, shuts down a possibility. And I had nothing else, no other options. So I gave it a shot. And, within, I want to say 6 weeks, he had me moved in with him. Um, I mean, he told me he loved me within a couple of days of us hanging out for the first time.
Oh,
It was
wow.
the two of us against the world. Everything I told him about my growing up and my family, he mirrored that, but I didn't see it as that back then. I thought, oh my God, he gets me. He understands me. Like, this really is my guy. He's the one. And he made me believe it, even though there were all these angry outbursts, violent outbursts, unreasonable, like really unreasonable reactions to simple minor things. I just excused it. Oh, he's having a bad day. And, or we all have bad days, or maybe he just woke up on the wrong side of the bed. We all do that too, you know, but it was this constant push and pull that never ended. I mean, it was the epitome of a love-hate relationship. When he loved me, oh my God, he loved me. I mean, he would caress my cheek and he would hold my hand, very affectionate, and just said the sweetest things to me. But when he hated me, it was bad. It was really bad. Um, and we had a child together. He didn't want children. And honestly, I was never one of those little girls that wanted to play house and have lots of kids. And I I liked the idea of motherhood, but I think it scared me because my mother had been so emotionally detached from me.
Mhm.
And they always say you turn into your parent or parents. And the thought that, even though I thought there's no way that I could do that, I didn't want to I didn't want to take that chance. So I thought that's fine because I have no business having a kid. I am so ill-equipped to have a child. There is no way that I don't know how to be a good mom because I mean, I hate saying those words out loud, but I didn't have a good mom. So then you know, we got married. I was 25 when we got married, and somewhere around 26, 27, everyone else was all the and baby showers I was going to and holding everyone else's babies. I started feeling that thing that we feel as women sometimes, that you just get that itch, like, I want one. And I had this really, I mean, I've been judged for it, but I'm just going to say it because it is what it is. I had this idea that if I had a baby and I would never treat it like my mother and stepfather treated me. I would love my baby more than any other baby was ever loved in this entire world. Like, no child would ever be loved more than what I would love it as its mother. And I thought, if I gave a baby all of my love and all of my devotion and everything in my soul, that would be the one person in this world, in my life, that would love me back that much. And, it for somebody, again, that all I wanted was love, and I didn't feel like I was getting it from the person that had promised it to me. I thought, we should have a baby. We should have a baby. I couldn't convince him. It took me a little while, but eventually he agreed. And it was not a romantic or, exciting process by any means. It was me figuring out because I had some miscarriages. We had some misses there. Um, but going through the checking my ovulation cycle and when is the timing right and all this stuff. And I mean, when it came down to it, our relationship was not, I don't think it had ever really been in a good place, but it was what it was. And it was more of a business transaction. The way my son was created, which is an awful thing, but it was effective. And I got pregnant, rough pregnancy, but carried him full term. And he was born and beautiful and healthy, and it was amazing. And even the night he was born, even my ex, he was there, and we were a family. And I saw something in his eyes, and that gentleness again that he had shown me every now and then, that I thought, maybe this is what's gonna fix everything. We
Mhm.
certainly didn't have our son to do that, but I thought I had this hope. And unfortunately, what I had done was I had brought a baby into a situation that was never going to change. So my son was born in 2003, and he was 17 when I finally divorced his father. But for those 17 years, I mean, my biggest regret is that I didn't take him and get out of it on the few little chances I had before he could really remember anything, because it was, I feel like it almost got worse after we had
Mm.
our son, because our son was very clingy, very colicky. He only wanted me, but at the same time, as I mentioned, you know, we live in kind of, it's rural. I mean, you can see neighbors and stuff, but everybody has acreage or farmland and whatever. So it was kind of isolating. I worked from home, so I was alone a lot.
Mhm.
So I think while my son was in my womb, I mean, he didn't really know anybody's voice but mine. And my husband had traveled for work. He was only home a couple of days a week. or not even, sometimes a couple days a month now that I think about it. So he wasn't around much. Um, so I think that's why my son was so clingy. I was what was familiar. I was what comforted him, and he only wanted me. And so the jealousy, my ex-husband was just ridiculously jealous of this baby. And he would start, I mean, here's our newborn baby, and he would start just screaming at me, "It's you two against me." Like he created this division right from the
Mm,
get-go. And I'm like, he's a baby. He's crying for me. Like I'm trying to explain these reasonable, logical things. Like he's only ever heard my voice. Of course, he only wants me. That's why he screams when you carry him or whatever. But just be gentle with him. But all it was screaming, slamming doors, all this stuff. Um, there was a lot. There's a lot, in the book that I've published, it's specifically about the 25 years I spent with my ex. And there's a lot in there about, that there was a suicide, well, I don't know if it was so much an attempt as a threat on his part, that it put me in a really bad position to have to worry about, do I take my son and run and prevent him from being exposed to this or hearing it? Or, I mean, you know, looking back, would he have remembered anything he had heard or seen? Probably not. But when you're in that situation, all you can think about is protecting your kid. Or do
yeah.
I put my kid down and go and tend to this man who has a gun and is threatening suicide? Or do I leave the baby, like put him in the car, go and make sure somebody, my ex isn't gonna commit suicide, and then hope I can come back to the car? Like, to put me in these situations. Like I already had been through childhood abuse and all that trauma. So now here I am in more traumatic situations. Then there was another night that, my ex liked to drink a lot. So there was that added on top of everything else. And there was a night that he swung a crowbar in my head and I ducked. And, my son's right there, and just even just through the years screaming at me, calling me all kinds of vulgar names. um and I'm talking when my son's 6 years old, 16 years old, all through, right there in the car, all three of us, and he's screaming at me, you effing this, and using the C word and calling me a whore and all these things in front of our son. um there was a lot. He attempted to kidnap our son in the middle of the night one night, and I mean, I literally let him drag me across the ground because I didn't know what to do to stop him. He had our son in his arms, and he said I was never going to see them again. And I threw myself down and around his legs. I thought if I held his feet together or bit his ankles, anything to take my kid. Just horrific things that happened in our house. But see, to the rest of the world, it's like my stepfather. Oh, he's funny, he's charming, he's kind, he'll do anything for anybody. Yet this is what we were going through in our house. So at one point when my son was 13, 14 years old, we were driving home from a Thanksgiving at my aunt's house. My ex-husband, he didn't like to join us on holidays most of the time. So we were in the car alone, just driving along, and my son just out of nowhere says, "I need you to promise me something." And I said, "What's that?" He says, "Well, I know you're going to divorce dad eventually." And he goes, "I don't blame you." But he says, "Please don't do it while I'm still around. Can you wait until I leave for college or wherever I'm going to go? Because I don't want to be through the hell he's going to put us through." And I thought about it and I'm like, well, I've made it this far, so I'll stick it out a few more years. I mean, what's a few more years? But we didn't make it quite there. We didn't make it quite there. I eventually um got sick, and this was actually one of the reasons that I wrote the book, was because I think it's important for people to know that all of this trauma, all of the abuse, whatever kind of abuse it is, it can have very, very serious effects on your health. I knew something was wrong with me. I think everybody knows what's wrong if you feel something really wrong with your body. And it was, I'd go to the regular doctor. Well, I think you just have anxiety. Well, yeah, of course I have some anxiety. I live every day with anxiety. I'm a little tense all the time and worried and cautious and all these hyper vigilant about everything. I can't even sleep at night because I'm afraid something's going to happen. Um, but there were still so many things wrong with me. And I went to another doctor that said I was hypersensitive. And yeah, I might be experiencing things, but it's psychosomatic and all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, people are starting to make me feel like I'm nuts, just like my ex is, he was telling me, of course, that I'm crazy. That's their MO. So I made a spreadsheet because I'm a type A personality. So I'm like, I like facts. So I made a spreadsheet on Excel with all my symptoms. And on the column side, I marked, 1 through 30 or 31 for the days of the month. For each date, I marked, put a check mark and sometimes put a number if I could remember the count for how many times I experienced each symptom on each given day. And I also monitored my stress levels with regard to my ex, as far as if we had a day that there was, I call it an event, like something happened that wasn't nice. I was noticing my symptoms, like it would just flare up all across the board. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking, like when I was a kid, I had a lot of stomach aches and headaches. But I was a kid. I just thought I had a lot of stomach aches and headaches, but it was a lot. But now as an adult making this spreadsheet, I was starting to see the headaches, the stomach aches, blurred vision. My right arm especially would go completely dead numb, like complete lot of tingling, um, you know, stuff like that. I wasn't sure if it was related, but like constipation versus the diarrhea, heartbeats. I've definitely felt irregular heartbeats, the arrhythmia. There were times where I would get a fever a lot and I couldn't understand that, but it seemed to correlate with my heart. Um, oh God, there were so stiffness in my muscles. It was like I felt like 100-year-old person. And I'm just, for some background, I was a runner. I coached cross country for 9 years at the grade school during this time. So I walked or ran 5 miles every single day at least. Like I was a healthy, person. So and I can go across, there are so many more symptoms, but blacking out, that was the other one. I would get dizzy and black out a lot, very lightheaded. But anyway, long and short of that, it took me going to another doctor, and another doctor started seeing specialists, finally got in front of the right neurologist and a functional medicine doctor that put it all together. And they're like, you've been living in fight or flight mode for a long time, 4 decades.
Mm-hmm.
That's releasing a lot of cortisol. And
Mm-hmm.
they're like, we think because you're having autoimmune issues, you're having all this other stuff. And I was also very short of breath. I felt like I had a sore throat for like 3 years straight, and I couldn't figure that out either. Well, they ended up having me tested by Mayo Clinic. Mayo Clinic had me do a cortisol test. And just so for people to understand, they test you at 5 different times of the day
Mm-hmm.
around the 24-hour clock, because your levels should be somewhere between 100 and like 600 or 700 depending on the time of day, including when you're sleeping, because I did have to wake up in the middle of the night to do one of these swabs for the test. So Mayo Clinic came back and said, we must have compromised this test because there's no way that the results are this high. Like they are astronomically high. So they had me retest and the results came back high. So again, your levels should be between 1 and like 600 or 700. Mine were consistently around 2,500 and higher, 24/7, even when I was
Oh,
sleeping.
friend.
So yeah.
Oh,
So,
friend.
and again, to go back, cortisol is a stress hormone. It's kind of a sister hormone to adrenaline. So it's that, like
Mm-hmm.
when you get in that fight or when you're afraid. So that gives you an idea of the level of fear that I was living in. So my body had basically decided that it must be fighting something as if like a
Mhm.
cancer or something. So it was depleting my white blood cells, which is why I was having all these autoimmune issues. But it eventually I was diagnosed with upper airway resistance syndrome, which is classified as a sleep disorder and a lung disease. But the neurologist said it's like having COPD and fibromyalgia all at the same time because I had tons of fibromyalgia symptoms. They even tested me for MS. So, I mean, this is the level I want people to understand of what my body was going through. And it
So,
was from stress.
yes, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Have you connected the infertility and the miscarriages to your cortisol
Yes.
issue? I
Yes.
experienced this as well.
Okay. So you get it. And I had no
Yeah.
idea because I had a few miscarriages before my son, and actually we had a few after. Um, and I never knew that's something that we did discover, that yes, they said it's very common for people with autoimmune issues to have infertility issues as well. So yes, they definitely related that to the cortisol,
Yeah.
which I feel like, I mean, forgive me for saying it, but sometimes I feel like it's, nature knows better. Maybe that's nature's way of saying this is not a situation you want to bring a child into. We're making that decision for you. But I did. And it turned out okay for my son, thank God, as okay as it can be. I think he's still affected in ways that he won't talk about. But yes, I absolutely wholeheartedly need people to understand what, even if it's just the verbal abuse is enough to affect you to the point that it feels stressful, enough for your body to react. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it doesn't matter that it's only words. It
it
it's
doesn't. The
still
words really hurt more than the physical. I hate to say, for my experience, other people can disagree, but it's really awful.
it still affects every aspect of who you are. It doesn't matter if there's
Yeah.
not a bruise. It doesn't matter if you didn't need stitches. It doesn't matter if there were no broken bones. It still affects every part of who you are as an individual.
Yes, but unfortunately, the world doesn't understand that because the world wants to see your black eyes and even bruises on your leg or your arm aren't effective enough. They want to see you beaten to a pulp and hospitalized before they will believe
Mhm.
you and take your story seriously. They don't understand the internal effects of abuse. And that is, I think, what angers me most about all of this, and my mission to create this awareness is because something has got to change, and I don't have the answers. I'm not a legal professional or in any capacity part of the judicial system, but the fact that these people can walk around freely after what they have done, there has to be a way to make them pay some consequences for, words can kill people. You can kill somebody without putting your hands on them,
Mhm.
and we need to do something different about this. But in the meantime, I mean, I just hope, as idealistic as it sounds, that people will stop and think before they speak, and stop and think about how they're treating other people, and see
Mhm.
that they can have a very real impact on somebody's mental state, because you don't know what that person is going through. People even still today say, oh, but you don't look sick. Oh,
Mm.
well, this is makeup. This is a curling iron and makeup. Yes, I do this now because when I didn't, when I walked around like I usually did, hair up in a ponytail, no makeup, people would tell me how pale I looked and how sick I looked. You look like you've been hit by a truck. So now I do this, and people say, well, you don't look sick. I even had somebody I'm remarried. Somebody called my husband and said, do you believe her? And he's like, she has an oxygen machine. Like, yes, I see her every day struggle with, I call it the musical chair of symptoms, even though I'm safe now and I am much
Mhm.
better. I've put on, because part of that, illness, when I really took it seriously, I had dropped 15 pounds in 2 weeks for no reason, but it came immediately after a really awful, awful event with my ex. And so that's when I was just like, I know something is wrong with me. I was 93 pounds. I was
Oh my heavens.
skeletal. Yeah. So, I mean, like, I'm good now, but yes, I still struggle with stuff. Like, you can even hear, like, my voice is raspy. That's, it's my airway. I get low on oxygen. I have an oxygen machine that, thank God, I don't use anywhere near what I used to. But this is something that I'm going to have to live with it the rest of my life.
Hmm.
You can't just let it go. And that's the other aspect of any mental health or, that comes from abuse, the trauma. I mean, I hate when people say that, just let it go, get past it. Well,
Just
believe
move
me,
on.
I don't
Just move on.
carry that. Yeah. Like I always picture, is it Hercules with the weight of the world on him? You think I don't want to put that down and be free and just skip and jump rope and sunshine and rainbows? I would love that. But it's not realistic because other people have put the burden on me and now I have to deal with it. But, I hope that those of us that have been through it find, I think you have to be ready to take on healing because it's not
Yeah.
easy.
It's not for the faint of heart.
No, healing, I think, is almost worse than the original trauma because the original trauma, even if, and I'm sure you were like me, if you experience it over a long term or any, you do become hyper vigilant and you know the signs, you know when it's coming, but you still don't know. No. So when it happens, it's obviously involuntary and unexpected in some aspect. But when you are healing, you are literally walking straight into it because you have to face it head on and look it dead in the eyes and say, I know who you are. And I'm getting chills. I know what you've done to me. And now we're going to deal with this. And it
And you're not
is
going to control me anymore.
scary. Exactly. But it's scary and awful. And I think people have this idea that like you're just going to go to sleep, wake up one day and like a magic wand, you're just suddenly healed and the skies open up and the sunshine and
Gee,
your
I wish.
hair is blowing in the wind and everything's just perfect. You know, it's awful. It's not just awful, but you are dealing with it. You're ruminating, about all the things that you're learning about yourself and remembering things and all those triggers are coming back, but you're trying to subdue them because you have to go to work and you want to seem normal to your kid and you have a little class party at your kid's school and all these things. So, and not to mention, you know, if you are with somebody, any partner or spouse or your children, your coworkers, neighbor, I mean, anybody you come, your family, your friends, they're going through that healing journey with you, whether they know it or not. You
Mhm.
have decided to heal, but it is affecting you to the point where it is affecting your behavior. It's affecting your thought. It's affecting some days for me, my functionality. There were times where I would have a depressive episode. Like, I know I need to get out of bed, but like nobody needs me right now, or at least for a few hours. And I just, I read somewhere that depressed means that your body needs deep rest. And I think that's why people who are depressed or going through some healing trauma and all that, we just sometimes we just need to rest our minds because it's a lot. It's a lot. But I think if you can make some sense of where you were and where you are now and how it happened and what happened and how you feel and just really acknowledge and validate yourself, which I think is really important, and respect yourself enough to know how you're going to change things going forward, then it'll always still be there, but you'll be better, and you'll have
Yeah.
in a way resolved it
Hmm.
so that it doesn't affect you like it did before you were on this healing journey. Maybe you can add to that.
Yeah, it's very much like walking into a dark closet where a big, scary monster is living and confronting that monster head on.
Yes. But you don't know where it is, and you're
You
reaching
don't
out
know
and you're
you
feeling things that are familiar and
yeah,
that you don't want to. But yeah, I always
and
tell people it's kind of like sticking your whole arm into a lion's mouth. You know that thing's going to bite you and you know it's going to hurt bad. It's going to tear your arm off, but you have to do it.
yeah, yeah,
And that's what it
and
was for me writing my book, because I was not healed in I was just starting. It was at the beginning of when I was safe, but my book actually came from a journal that I kept, and it wasn't even a real journal. Like, we all have, like, our kids come home from school at the end of the school year with notebooks that are half full, and I was so cheap that I would tear out the the used pages and keep the remaining unused pages for whatever. You never know if you need scrap paper or whatever, but I had taken one of those because I thought it was an inconspicuous way for me to keep a record. Because I kept getting told that this didn't happen. I never said that. You're crazy. So I started keeping in one of these used notebooks, the date, the time, what he said, what he did, whatever, just a brief summary. And I hid it under my basement couch cushion. So when we went into the shelter in place during COVID, I took it out because honestly, I was scared. At that point, I mean, I was done. I had talked to an attorney, but now we're in a shelter in place and I'm locked in this house with this guy. And he had, he was violent. He was an alcoholic, even though he'd never say that. He was abusive. So, yeah, I was worried. And I thought there needs to be a record of things in case something happens to me. But then I started typing out the stories from my journal, elaborating. It made me feel better. Like, I'm not crazy.
mhm,
I'm not seeing this in any weird way. Like, he made me feel delusional, like I was psychotic. And I'm self-aware enough. I want to know if I need that kind of help. If I really am, not seeing my reality the way it really is, I need to know this. I mean, that's the responsible thing to do. But as I'm writing this all out, I realized, I mean, I don't know, people can argue with me about religious beliefs, but I am a Christian. And,
mhm,
I just had this just feeling, like people say when God speaks to them. I don't know if that's what it was, but I just suddenly had this thought out of nowhere. You have a degree in journalism, you know how to write, you're doing these elaborate stories. You need to put this out there. You need to write this book, and you need to make sure other people know that they're not alone, because I thought I was.
mhm,
I was so isolated. That's a narcissist thing. They isolate you. I didn't see any of my family or friends, and most of them had given up even trying to have a relationship with me. So I thought it was important to share the story. But, it adds a whole level. I didn't want to involve my son too much in the story, but that is a huge part of when you're a mother, your instinct is to protect your child from
mhm,
all this harm. And here I had a child, inserting him into a situation that only got worse because
yeah,
he was so, inclined to me. And we had developed very early on in his, he must have been probably 5, 6, 7 years old around that time, where he would start giving me looks, like, without having to say anything. He could give me a look across the room, like, I know to tread lightly, like, dad's in a mood right now. We had this, like, unspoken nonverbal communication, and we would protect each other or text each other as he got older. He'd be like, just beware, it's going to be one of those nights. That was one of our codes. Um, we're in for it tonight. It's one of those nights. So, it was a rough patch, but again, I just want people to understand that, healing is really important when you're ready, because you're not
mhm,
always ready and you're not always in, the best position. But when you feel like you're ready and you can take it on, do it however you can. Traditional therapy did not work for me with my lung issues, and that's a whole thing. But, like, back to writing the book, keeping the journal, I
mhm,
tell people, if writing is better for you, and that's also good for people that don't have the, insurance or the financial resources available to be able to pay for help, writing it out you would be surprised how much I learned about my ex and myself and our relationship by going back and rereading it, or having to delve into, like, my publisher would ask me questions after reading things and say, but what about this? And, can you tell me more about, elaborate more on this? And that, going really deep into some of these situations, really made me see things a whole different way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was a huge part of the healing process. But we all have different, everybody's got something they're going through, but I just think it's really important that if people can and are willing to delve into their past, you certainly can have a beautiful life. You don't have to be a victim of your past or a victim of what people have done to you. You can definitely get to a point where you're living a good life, your best life, as they say.
Yeah, just going back really quickly to journaling. Um,
Mm-hmm.
if you grew up in a situation where it wasn't safe for you to vocalize how you were feeling, if you've dealt with a lot of gaslighting or a lot of people making you second guess your
Mm-hmm.
experience or your feelings or your thoughts or whatever, journaling for me has been something that has been immensely healing, because when I put that pen to paper and I write, things come out that I could
Mm-hmm.
never in a million years say out loud.
Exactly. And I think the important thing, and this is what I advise people, because I have had people approach me asking more about that, and I do want to say I am not a therapist, a doctor, or whatever. I only have lifelong experience as a victim and what has worked for me. But when you write, if you are going to take on the journaling, I think it's important not to monitor yourself, because then
But
you can get to where you, like you said, where
do
everything just don't even stop, even if it's babbling and it makes no sense. So many people, when they start writing, like, they think, and I say, don't think, just
get
write,
no
just every
judgment.
thought that comes out, just write it down, because it's okay to feel how you feel.
Yeah.
And that's what people, I think, are responding to so well with my book, because I am saying things in my book that are uncomfortable. I am admitting thoughts that I don't feel comfortable having, but you know what? That's part of living this life. You're going to think things that aren't polite. You're going to feel things that you wish you didn't feel. But if you don't get it out and validate your feelings and release those feelings, you're just going to suffer inside. So it's important. And I also want to make a point. I appreciate you saying that when you're in an abusive situation where you can't speak up, which most of the, well, I shouldn't say most, I'm just going to say, like, in my childhood, that was the big thing, because I was one of these, I was always very strong-willed as a little girl. I'd stand up for myself, but I would pay the consequences. So I learned to shut my mouth. And I did write back then. I loved writing, but music was huge for me, because I couldn't get in trouble for singing a song that I'd heard on the radio, or that I'd heard, on the record player. I'm from that era. So music, and there were songs that just resonated with me, that hit my soul. Like I felt like somebody somewhere understood, or maybe it was just the melody matched my melancholy, or whatever it was. And so, like, in my book, that's one thing I had to explain in the foreword, I guess. All my chapter titles are song titles, because I played this little game as a little girl, that I would associate certain songs to certain people, or to certain situations that happened. And I mean, still to this day, I can hear a song and just be like, that's it right there. Like, this moment with this person, that did, like, that's, if I could express it in this way, that's how I would express it. So even if you're not a writer, have no interest in writing, you know, listening to music, and not just, the popular stuff or whatever, like, expose yourself to different types, because you'd be surprised what you will find in those lyrics. it's
Yeah.
amazing. But there are definitely ways that you can find that validation that you need, even if you can't express it yourself.
Yeah. So what has been your biggest takeaway from your healing journey?
I think, oh, that's a loaded question,
Oh,
lady.
it really is. It really is.
It really is. I think the biggest takeaway is just, and it's something I've only recently learned, just I've said it a million times, but validating myself.
Mhm.
I struggled my whole childhood for approval from mom and approval from her husband, and nothing I ever did was good enough. And even now that I'm in my latter 40s, there are still times that comes up, and I can't even like acknowledge my own accomplishments sometimes, like how far
Mhm.
I've come and big things. I mean, I've published a book. I should be like thrilled and excited and screaming from the rooftops. And I'm like, oh, well, anybody can do,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
but I think that I've learned since I've been healing to validate myself and to say, it's okay. It's okay for me to love myself enough to say no to somebody. I don't have to people please. I don't, people who love me will understand and respect that I have boundaries, and it's okay to have those boundaries. And it's
Mhm.
okay to put myself first. It's not conceited. I can love myself without being conceited, and by still considering other people and doing
Mhm.
for other people. And that's something that I never really understood or was able to enforce comfortably. So that's what I would say. I mean, that's a lot. That's kind of like self-love, self-respect, boundaries, validation. But, you really do have to find that within yourself to get to a place where you're okay going into the world. Like, you know what? So I don't have a mother. That sucks. But you know what? I'm okay. I have other people who love me and they're not obligated to. And,
Mhm.
yes, I felt like an orphan my whole life and I was very alone and nobody understood me. But my goodness, since I've been speaking out about abuse, it's amazing how many people understand me and get me and
Mhm.
have been there. And, you know, there's other ways to find validation. We just have to find it within ourselves first, and then we will attract everything else.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. Where can our audience connect with you further if they would like to?
I would say start with my website, danasdiaz.com. You can find the link to buy the book. You can find all the other podcasts that I've been on, and including this one when it's released on my press page. There's a quiz on there to see if you are potentially being a victim or were a victim of narcissistic abuse. I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and I do always encourage people to reach out. I love hearing happy stories, and I've had people reach out with not so happy stories, but, if I can provide encouragement or even just send you a heart or a hug, I'm more than happy to do that. And you do get me, not some, person that has been hired to manage things. But I definitely like to know that, people to know that they have a community and a safe place when they're dealing with me that they can come to. So,
Awesome. So you can find Dana's links in the show notes of this episode. Thank you so much for joining me today, Dana. Thank you for being open and vulnerable and sharing your story. And I wish you all the best on your healing journey.
thank you so much.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Mamahood After Trauma podcast. If you resonated with what you heard, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and share it with a friend who would also benefit, because we rise together. Until next time, Mama, keep shining.